Chapter 8. The Law of Giving and Receiving. Where prosperity is concerned, the most important law of life for us is to understand the law of giving and receiving. In the Bible, it is called sowing and reaping. It is based on the circulatory activity of life. All of life is in continual circulation. If we do not give back into life, we interfere with and eventually dam up the circulatory activity. The person who gives of himself and his substance, no matter how little, opens the door for life to pour in, not only compensating him for his gift, but increasing the gift. The more one gives, the more that person is able to receive. Many business people have discovered that giving is receiving. Have you ever wondered why it is that some people seem to have such phenomenal success, outdistancing everyone else in their field? A highly successful insurance salesman once gave the key to his success. His name was Vash Young. He wrote a bestseller about it entitled A Fortune to Share. The man was tops in his field. Year after year he made the $1 Million Round Table. The rest of the salesmen considered him lucky, but there was no doubt in their minds that he was the most successful man in the company. But was it luck? His book revealed the secret. He carried around in his billfold a very dog-eared index card, yellow with age, on which he had written the verse. It was Luke 6:38. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you mete, withal it shall be measured to you again. He said that up to the time he had discovered this verse in the Bible, he had been considered a go-getter. He made sales all right. He closed them by whatever means he could. However, his high-pressure methods made him very few friends. And then he came across that verse in Luke. He said it stood out as if a bright light had been focused upon it. The next day he went out with an entirely different attitude. He determined to see how much service he could give away. I decided I would be a go-giver instead of a go-getter, he said. And then the whole picture changed. He stopped thinking about how am I doing and what am I going to get out of this. And life took care of him in wonderful ways. You see, it is a law of life. The more you give away, the more you keep. There was a man, and they called him Mad. The more he gave, the more he had. John Bunyan. My wife and I had two friends whom we admired very much. They have both passed on, but I feel sure they would not have minded my telling you this story about them. They were maiden ladies who were very successful in real estate, delightfully Irish, with a great sense of humor. Good Catholics, both of them. They once told me that whenever business became slack, they decided it was time to give a little more, so they would write out a generous check. I think it was to the Little Sisters of the Poor. I'm sure they did not do this just to make money, for they were very giving people. They told me about it because they knew I understood, and as we talked, they fairly glowed with the joy it gave them to that extra tithe to the church charity of their choice. Everybody in town knew these two ladies and loved them. It was only natural that they got plenty of referrals. They were givers, not getters, but life always gave back to them, even more than they gave. A man befriended an elderly woman who lived alone. He, too, had no thought of personal gain, as he went out of his way to do little things for a lonely woman. He visited her frequently, ran errands for her, and they became good friends. She told him that although she had grown children of her own, she felt closer to him than she did to her own children. Knowing that she was lonely, he stopped by often to see her. One day, as they sat in her living room visiting, he happened to remark that he had become very interested in art. "There are a number of paintings in my attic," she told him. "Perhaps you'd be interested in some of them." As he started up the attic steps, she called after him, "If there are any paintings that interest you, bring them down. Pick out the ones you like, and you are welcome to have them." The attic hadn't had a visitor for many years. Nothing had been disturbed, judging by the thick layer of dust on everything. He had gone up to the attic wearing a dark blue suit. It was a charcoal gray when he came down, but soon the clouds of dust were forgotten as he began to examine the paintings. Here was a collector's dream come true. Imagine his excitement as he discovered that several of the paintings were by well-known artists and would be considered quite valuable. He could tell that they were genuine, paintings that had been out of circulation for years, hidden away in this dusty attic. His excitement grew as he uncovered painting after painting that would create a sensation in an art auction. Hurrying downstairs, he explained to his elderly friend that she had a fortune in paintings in her attic. "Allow me to have them appraised," he offered. "I will be glad to pay you every cent they are worth." "I should say not," the little woman told him. "I had forgotten that they were there, and so they are of little value to me. Take all that you want. It is my great pleasure to give them to you." To her, the paintings had little value. She had no need of money, but friendship freely given to a lonely woman was of great value. How happy she was to be able to do something for him. "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over shall people give unto your bosom," said the Master, who understood better than anyone else the laws of life. That which we give into the lives of others comes back into our own. The man who told me the story of the long-lost paintings added a story of his own. "It's not much of a story," he said, "but in a way it has similar meaning. I left home at 16, he said. Life at home had become intolerable, and I discovered that if I had a job and a place to stay, I would be allowed to leave home. I found myself a job working in a restaurant. At first, I lived in my car, but then a friend introduced me to a woman who had a big house. This woman needed a boy to do the gardening, and I offered to do this in exchange for the privilege of sleeping in a room that she did not use. At first, he said, I just slept in the room and continued to study in the car, but gradually we talked together more and more. She took an interest in my welfare and began very delicately to advise me and to look out for me. She was lonely, and so was I. I soon discovered that she wasn't eating properly. The cook at the restaurant began to give me lectures that he couldn't use. Sometimes he gave me a half of a chicken or a part of a roast. There was more than I could eat, and so I brought the food home to her. It seemed quite natural, sharing our meals, each one looking out for the other. I was so glad to be able to see that she ate regular meals, and I suppose she felt the same way about me. And so began a wonderful relationship, two lonely people helping each other. The boy continued to live there until he finished school, his life enriched by this gentle woman who helped him find himself without seeming to interfere with his freedom. She had found a son, and he had found the roots he badly needed at that time. He smiled tenderly as he remembered again those days. I'm a bad one for remembering birthdays and anniversaries, he said. But I had my wife write down the special days in her life of this woman, and gather we never forget her. There is a destiny that makes us brothers. No man goes his way alone. All that we send into the lives of others comes back into our own. Edwin Markham. I think these stories pretty much speak for themselves. Now contrast them with this one. Using the law in reverse. Mr. Putty and Julie are two of the characters who lived at 10 Dulcimer Street, London, in Norman Collins's story London Belongs to Me. Mr. Putty lived in the attic. He was a widower, a morose, fat man, often changing jobs, and delighting in eating. Julie was an old lady who lived in a room at the back of the second floor of the house and worked in the cloakroom of a nightclub. Returning from work, Julie was involved in a traffic accident. She wasn't seriously hurt, but Mr. Putty persuaded her to go to a solicitor and make a claim. To her great surprise, she later was paid £65. Remembering that but for Mr. Putty, she never would have received a penny, she felt she ought to give him half the amount. This could not be immediately done, since the money was in the form of a check. Later she decided that since she, and not Mr. Putty, had been involved in the accident, a fourth would be enough for him. The thought of 15 crisp pound notes caused her to hesitate again. In any case, was it proper for a lady to give money to a man? A better idea would be to buy him a present, let's say a pair of cufflinks. Back in her room, Julie felt a twinge of pain. Perhaps it was an indication of something seriously wrong with her, and if so, she would need all of her 65 pounds. A happy idea came to her. She would give Mr. Putty a tin of soup for his supper. Better still, she would make it herself and take it to him in a bowl on a tray. When she reached for the tin of soup, she found that by adding water, 1 tin could be made sufficient for 2 people. So she prepared half of the tin of soup for Mr. Putty and took it to him to show her gratitude for his help. Then a little over 32 pounds became a half a tin of thin soup. Don't laugh. I suppose we've all been guilty of having some generous impulse rationalized by us into the equivalent of half of a tin of thin soup. It's easy to talk ourselves out of our good inspiration along giving lines. Yes, give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, and shaken together, and running over, is the law. But the Master added, For with the same measure that you mete withal it shall be measured to you again. Another time he said, Freely you have received, freely give. Halford E. Luckach, in Living Without Gloves, wrote, It is more blessed to give than to receive, but the givers who cannot take in return miss one of the finest graces in life, the grace of receiving. To receive gratefully from others is to enhance others' sense of their worth. It puts them on a give-and-take level, the only level on which real fellowship can be sustained. It changes one of the ugliest things in the world, patronage, into one of the richest things in the world, friendship. The law at work. The law is that we must first give before we are able to receive. Just as the seed must first be planted before the fruit can appear, so must we plant generously if we would reap generously. He who gives meagerly, or for what he can gain from the gift, receives but meagerly. Ah, but he who would give freely with no thought of gain is going to receive richly. You can't outgive God. As someone once said, you make a living with what you get, but you make a life with what you give. We're talking about a law of life. Giving is not just parting with something, it is opening the heart and mind to receive again from life's infinite storehouse. We find that the more we give, the more we are able to receive. Some of you may remember the old-fashioned pump. Remember how we used to have to take the dipper and pour a little water down into the pump to get the flow started? This was known as priming the pump, and the pump refused to give water until it was primed. This is pretty much the way it is all through life. We have to give first, and then life will give unto us. Yes, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. I have known many people in my life who have prospered greatly because they learned the law of giving and receiving, and put it into practice. Today these people are well provided for because they dared to give themselves away, dared to give that which they had, and sometimes even more than they thought they had at the time. They gave freely with no thought of reward, and then, when they had even forgotten the gifts they had given, in came the harvest of life, bringing them the increase, all that they needed, and many times more. Prosperous people are good receivers. The prosperous people I know are good receivers. They have learned to accept their good and be grateful for it. Over and over people write me, please tell me how to receive. It occurs to me that one simple approach might be to start saying thank you to life. Thank God for your food, no matter who prepares it. Thank God for the air you breathe, the services that are performed for you. Thank God for the things provided for you by the city, the state, the federal government. Let's turn our discontent and critical thoughts into gratitude for the good already received. Praise and bless each thing that comes our way and see what happens. We might all of us be surprised